Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Quebec video. Now, before I begin, once again, I want to shout out on my channel members. I really appreciate the support you guys give the channel. If you guys like the work I do here and you want to see more of it, by all means go into the link in the description below and press that join button. Every little bit helps. Otherwise, you can do your regular YouTube things like share, subscribe, comment below, drop super thanks, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Also worth noting, I am still doing monthly Q&As, so pop any questions you have in the comments with tagged Q&A, and I will get to them in the Q&As. Obviously, I will prioritize supers before I prioritize other questions, but hey. I will get to the questions if there is time. Now with that, let us begin. So, some big rumblings are happening in Quebec provincial politics right now. So obviously, the Liberal Party has just had their leadership race. Pablo Rodriguez. Man, I can't pronounce that name very well. Just became the leader of the Quebec Liberal Party. And this has been quite the boon. Now, I'm just going to take a side digression here. So I've had a lot of complaints before about color schemes because the Conservatives, Coalition, CAQ, and Parti Québécois are very similar colors. I've tried a different thing in combination with some suggestions from people. So let me know if this is better or if it's worse or if it's the same. But continuing here. So this has turned into a quite interesting little period. So we don't have a ton of polls. He's only been the leader for about 3 weeks. But we are seeing some interesting signs here. So just to pull up the raw polling. So obviously before he's in, the Liberals are polling like 21, 19, 21, 22 range, right? He becomes the leader. Now they're at 26, 28, 29. Now we'll see a little bit where this trends because there's a couple things to consider. First off, there is going to be a honeymoon period for Pablo. I'm going to say Pablo because I really, for some reason, struggle to pronounce Rodriguez. That's, for some reason, I can't say that name very well. So I'm just going to call him Pablo. No offense to Pablo. So there is reason to believe that he's doing better right now in the raw polling than he will actually end up doing as a result of the honeymoon period, which is why my model currently has him at 23%. I'm being conservative in that he might not actually do as well as forecasted here. Now, it very well could be the case that he does sustain this over the next 6 to 12 months. And if that's the case, he will creep up in numbers. And as those numbers creep up, we're going to start seeing things solidify in predictable but quite interesting ways. So, for example, there are some fairly low hanging fruit seats the Liberals could pick up in Montreal-Laval area. This guy here, I think that's Saint-Rose, but I can't remember every single riding in Quebec, sorry. This guy here, which I think is Cartersville, doesn't matter. And some of these downtown ridings here, this guy from the Quebec Solidaire, those 5 are the easiest, lowest hanging fruit ridings-ish. This one might be easier than this Quebec Solidaire one, depending on how Quebec Solidaire is going, but Quebec Solidaire has not been doing so well of late. I will show you what I mean. This is the island of Montreal here. And you can see since January, they've lost 4 percentage points on the island. And some of these more recent polls actually have that a little more aggressive. Like Main Street, to bring this back over here. Main Street, oh, why did I do this? Okay, here we go. Main Street here, I'm just making a mockery of this. Okay, here we go. Main Street here has the Quebec Solidaire at 8 province-wide. Léger at 9. Now, Léger doesn't have Montreal and Laval separately. They just have them together, but combined, Montreal-Laval is only 10% for the Quebec Solidaire. And if you look at my forecasting here, this is 7.8 and 15.8, and these two regions about the similar population size. So even with the Leger models numbers, I have Quebec Solidaire currently a little higher than the raw polling does, specifically because, again, I'm sort of underestimating Rodriguez or Pablo on purpose, because I think this is a bit of a overestimation because of the honeymoon period. But to continue, so there's these 5 to 6 very low-hanging fruit seats, and if those do end up going for the Liberals, that basically denies, for the most part, gets very close to denying the PQ a majority. So obviously majority would be about 123. No, sorry. There's 124 seats. It's 63. So now put the PQ at just 65. If those 66. If those 6 seats go Liberal, which is a majority still, but it's pretty thin. And then you can start looking at some other seats. This part of Hull is potential pickup. Some of the areas, like this guy here, I think that's Compton. Some of the other areas in the southern Quebec are all that the CAQ currently control are places that a strong Liberals, who are around 28%, might pick up from a CAQ who's fallen down to, say, 14%. Now, picking seats up from the CAQ is not going to really affect the PQ numbers, but if we start seeing something like that, what I suspect is going to happen is the CAQ is going to get pulled apart. Now, I don't strictly think the CAQ is dead as a party. I really think anyone prognosticating on Quebec politics should be very, very careful about saying if a party is going to live or die, especially after the last 4 years. 8 years, really. The Parti Québécois came back from 3 seats to winning a majority right now. So we really should not over or underestimate impacts here. It's very possible that the CAQ with the right leader could come back. It's possible that the kind of soft nationalist position could get resurgent. However, there is a lot of headwind to the CAQ right now, and that's why part of the reason why Pablo is being so successful. So the two big headwinds are obviously Legault and his government have been making a lot of mistakes. I can't really go through all of them. If you're from Quebec, I hope you've been able to see them elsewhere. The reason I'm not going to go through them is every individual thing almost doesn't matter, but it's just the fact that it's kind of like with Trudeau near the end of it, all of these little mistakes over time, or all these little silly things that build up to the point where there's nothing you can easily point to. There's not one or two things that you can say, this is why Legault is bad, unpopular, or losing popularity. It's kind of the whole package. So it's kind of, there's not a good way to capture that in like one easy pithy sentence here. But so that's a big headwind. The Legault government's becoming unpopular. If I were to really pick, though, after saying and waffling on this, one or two things that's really hurting them, I suspect I would say it's the fact that the PQ have been comfortably outflanking them on immigration and continually pushing the Overton window to have a more and more restrictive immigration regime. Now, Legault is sort of pivoting to more restrictive immigration, but I don't think he's doing it sufficiently or fast enough for it to really matter, to really ward off. He'd almost, to ward off the PQ attacks, he kind of has to outflank the PQ. And right now, the PQ are still outflanking him on immigration. Because one of the core conceits of the CAQ to the Quebec nationalist voter is we can actually have our cake and eat it too. And right now, Plamondon is kind of showing people that actually you can't have your cake and eat it too. There's all these policies I want to do about culture and stuff like that, so immigration being a really big one, that Legault is unwilling or unable to do. So we actually need someone more strong like me. That's Plamondon's pitch. The other factor really hurting the CAQ is because of the rhetoric coming from the US, because of actions of Trump, because Trudeau got thrown out a window, the Liberal brand is having a very big resurgence across the country. You're seeing this in prairie provinces. You're seeing this in Quebec. You saw this federally. Now, Trudeau going out helps a lot. Trudeau was suppressing the Liberal brand because he was so disliked. Now, he was still relatively popular in Quebec, but when you have someone like Legault, who is kind of straddling the Federalist position, he's winning a lot of the soft Federalists, and you have people like Quebec Solidaire, who's also winning a lot of soft Federalists, and you have that kind of situation evolving, right? It's a lot harder. And also, the Liberals in Quebec have had consistently ineffective or bad leaders. If you watched my coverage of the 2022 election in Quebec, I was very critical of Dominic Anglade because she was just a nothing. She, for the most part, was just trying to copy Legault's positions at best. And at worst, she was taking positions that were extremely, extremely unpopular in Quebec. And there's just really no hope for that to ever play well. Now, with her gone, and with... I mean, we can even see, if we go back to the overall trends here. So, Quebec... These are slightly different. These are the actual numbers here. These are forecasts of my turnout model, so it's not 100% accurate, but I digress. With my current turnout model, I should say. So we can see here that she actually got around 14 in a bit. And as soon as she goes, the Liberals are doing better across the board. Everywhere. So, we do kind of see this. I mean, she was a lead weight to the party. Now, Mark Tagway, I can't remember how his last name is spelled to even try to pronounce it. He wasn't much better, but he obviously was a little better. And now Pablo comes in. He has a lot more name recognition. He has kind of the cred of leaving the Trudeau government before it was cool. So that does help him a little bit too, I suspect, with people who were unhappy with Trudeau. But then you can't underestimate the impact the Trump administration is having on the Federalist position. Trump right now is probably the strongest and best advocate for Quebec federalism in North America because he's basically showing that he doesn't particularly respect structure, trade deals, whatever. He wants what's best for the U.S. at all cost. And a lot of, particularly older people, but especially softer, more centristy people, the soft federalist, the soft nationalist type people, are much more concerned with actually being able to deal with this push, the threat of the U.S. Now, will this momentum and this energy sustain itself until next fall? That's a really good question. I can't really say right now, but that is one of the reasons why we're seeing this resurgence. It's not just Pablo. It's not just the honeymoon period. There is a certain amount to it that is irrespective of these two events. And I can kind of show this here. You look let's say fall 2024, the Liberals are at 17, 18, 16 in raw polling. You look, even up to January 19th, it's 15. You go to February 2nd, just 13 days later, and you're at 21%. 21.6 to Palace, 19 for Leger. So you do see this really big bump for the Liberals right at that moment. And this kind of draws from across the board, but the biggest decline is the Parti Québécois. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the January 19th PQ voters all went to vote Liberal. Some of them might be voting CAQ, some of them might be voting Conservative, or whatever. But this has been a headwind to the Parti Québécois, the Trump coming in and making this as a very big, very clear, very present threat that particularly older voters are worried about. Particularly the kind of liberal internationalist types that are really make up a large part of the population in Quebec, in southern Quebec. Sorry, Montreal and southern Quebec. But I'm not entirely sure how sustainable that is. And there's also a big wrinkle and a big threat for the Liberal Party here. Now, this is nothing concrete just yet, but there is a very strong potential that in the trade negotiations that Mark Carney is engaging in with Trump, that he might pull back from or abandon aspects of supply management. And that would be pretty bad for the hopes of the Liberals to stop the Parti Québécois. Now, this isn't just because supply management is a lot of people in Quebec care about it and like it. That is a factor. But it's where those people live. Those people live in rural areas in, roughly speaking, like here, a little bit over here, but where the farming is, right? That's where the farmers are. And I just grossly overdraw these, so don't, Quebecers in the audience, don't, like, nitpick my geographical swipes too hard. I wasn't really being very specific. But that could prove to be a big headwind to gaining enough rural support. Or in some of these, like, yes, these areas in the southeast here are rural. Sherbrooke itself, you could say, is a city, but a lot of the areas around it are pretty rural. But they're areas that aren't very firmly into the sovereigntist, hard nationalist camp. It's not like, say, the Bank, the St. Lawrence, which are much more nationalistic, or up here in the northern coast, which is very, very nationalistic. Those areas are much more strongly against the Liberals and much more strongly for the Parti Québécois. So those are less likely to go anywhere. But it's these ridings down here where any marginal decrease, any marginal impacts would be quite bad. Now, I'm not saying this will happen, but that is a potential risk for the party, for the Liberal Party. The other big risk, too, is how Pablo actually decides to start leading. Now, as a former Trudeau cabinet minister, he does have a certain reputation that he's going to have to deal with. Now, obviously, in Quebec, that's not as bad because Trudeau was never as unpopular in Quebec as he was in the rest of Canada. But it's still a hurdle because his government was still not that popular in Quebec. And there is also the big issue that he does have to try to present a more centrist tone. Because a lot of the big things the Trudeau government was known for are very socially liberal. And not just in like the very classic sense of like abortion rights or something like that, but very, very, very pro-LGBT, very, very pro-immigration, stuff like that. And these don't... The LGBT stuff is just not a salient or resonant issue in Quebec. Regardless of whether people support or don't, that doesn't matter. It's just not salient. People don't care, really. It's not a top-of-the-mind issue. But immigration is a very big top-of-the-mind issue in Quebec. A lot of the main politics right now and one of the main arguments for separatism is that there is no way to adequately deal with the immigration portfolio inside Canada. That's one of the main arguments for Plamondon. And that'll be a big hurdle because Pablo is intrinsically linked to a very high immigration government that he was a cabinet minister for. So he will have a headwind and will have to make sure he adequately addresses that portfolio. And the other big related factor to this is Legault still has government. He is still the premier. He still has 15 months to do something. Maybe he will pull a Trudeau, resign, and get replaced by a different leader who has less reputation damage or a better reputation, such as the Quebecois Mark Carney, if you will. Or perhaps he'll use the fact that he has government, he has a very large majority, to embark on a controversial but popular wedge issue. One I have seen people speculate before, though obviously I do not have any firm reports, so this is just potential. This is not necessarily a thing that is happening. But recent polls show that most Quebecers strongly support building a pipeline in Quebec. The Plamondon and the Parti Québécois don't. As far as I'm aware, Pablo doesn't as well. But the big one isn't for Legault to ward off Pablo per se. Because I strongly suspect a lot of the soft fat Federalists who supporting Pablo right now will go CAQ if the CAQ looks like they are a better bet to defeat or stop Plamondon. Since Legault is sort of vaguely, you could say, a soft Federalist, I would say he's kind of a third camp, where he's like an autonomous perhaps, but to a soft Federalist, an autonomous is much better than a separatist. The math of first past the post here. But the pipeline could very well be a way to wedge voters away from the Parti Québécois. It could also be a way to wedge voters away from the Liberals if the Liberals are not active to it. Or if because Legault does it, it kind of sacrifices or pulls back the winds of the sails of the Liberals. Because embarking on such a big nation-building project as allowing a pipeline to be built to New Brunswick would be kind of what the soft Federalists want anyways. Especially if Quebec gets a really good deal out of it, which I suspect is what Legault's going to try to do, or something similar to a degree to this. Because with the way he's polling right now, and with the number of seats he currently has, he has almost no safe seats. His own seat is not even particularly safe. It's only like an 8-point margin. But with the way he's polling in the high teens, if he doesn't do anything, his party's probably going to go and get destroyed. Maybe not destroyed, but will take a massive election L, and he'll be kind of stuck. The CAQ will be stuck in a rebuilding cycle where they're not really able to do anything absent getting a unicorn leader to replace Legault. Plamondon, in such sense, was kind of a unicorn leader for the Parti Québécois. So there's a lot of potential interest in this. And I might actually, depending on how much polling we get for Quebec, I might even do my own polling for Quebec, to be honest. I've done one before. I suspect I might do another update next quarter on Quebec, because there's a lot that could be happening right now. And it'll be really interesting to see how this evolves. But as of right now, I don't want to make this video too long-winded. I often have a bad habit of making videos too long-winded. But I'm going to cut this one a little short, much shorter than normal. Shorter than I normally want them to be, because I think I've already hit here the nails on the head of the main things, and it's just too early to dive deeper into things. Like, these are the risks for Pablo. These are the risks and the things Legault can do. Oh, I'll just cover the Conservatives for a second. They're starting to have a little bit of a breakthrough in the Quebec City area. And some of the recent polling is actually quite good. Right now, I currently have them only at 19% because of my modeling and all that stuff. But some of the recent polling has them as high as the 30% range in this region. So if that continues, you could very well see all of the suburbs of Quebec City go Conservative, which would be quite remarkable. A lot of that has to do with the highway around here. That's being sort of proposed, sort of not proposed. It's complicated. If you're from Quebec, and you know what I'm talking about, so I'm not going to elaborate too much more than that, because I have nothing. I have no insight to that highway project other than it's sort of happening, it's sort of not happening. It depends on what you say. But yeah, and for Quebec Solidaire, they're just doing abysmal. The party was never... I think a lot of the growth we saw with Quebec Solidaire over the last 20 years was basically just fake anyways, especially over the last 10 years. It wasn't ever because Quebec Solidaire was popular. It was really just because everyone else sucked. And now that we have a much stronger Plamondon option, a lot of the nationalists have left Quebec Solidaire to go back to the Parti Québécois. And because the Liberals are doing better, a lot of the gains in Montreal from the immigrant or the non-Francophone populations are going back to the Liberals. So Quebec Solidaire is declining, and I suspect they will keep declining more. I wouldn't be surprised if the NDP federally kind of foreshadows what's going to happen to Quebec Solidaire provincially. Now, I suspect Sherbrooke and Guyenne, I think it's Guyenne here, are probably pretty safe for this election cycle. These other two are hit or miss, but if they lose, 9 seats? What did I have them up for? Yeah, if they lose 9 seats, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad for the party. They got blown out in one of the by-election in Quebec City, which is quite remarkable, because it was a downtown core riding that historically has been relatively Federalist, and the Parti Québécois just blew out the Quebec Solidaire vote. So, we'll see how that keeps going. But that said, I like to keep this shorter, so I will bid you guys adieu, and I'll see you next week with something else.